Thank you. The third presenter is Professor Don Nutbeam, who, for reasons known only to himself, was returned from the United Kingdom, where he fulfilled a 6-year stint as Dean, as Vice-Chancellor of Southampton University, and served with considerable distinction there, and has come back to Sydney and in his retirement is working harder than ever. And one of the roles in which he has helped us immensely in recent months was as serving as the interim executive officer of Sydney Health Partners, which introduced him to the intricacies of the Medical Research Future Fund. So I thought it would be very helpful for us to hear from Don about what the research funding opportunities are through the Future Fund, and also make reference to ways in which funding might be obtained through Sydney Health Partners. So, Don, thank you for your company, and we look forward to hearing from you now.
Thanks very much. So the reason I returned to Australia is that I've learned throughout my career that the route to success is keep moving. It will never quite catch up with you, and you seem to be able to do all right with it. I was having a wry smile to myself because in contrast to the two previous speakers, so the NHMRC distributes hundreds of millions of dollars in research funding each year, and New South Wales Ministry through TRIGS and the various other schemes that Tony spoke of is distributing tens of millions of dollars now. Much to my, genuinely, when I left, things were not so good. When I come back, the ministry is very engaged in an extremely positive way. Sydney Health Partners, that I'll be primarily speaking about today, is currently distributing about $2 million a year, so please don't get excited. The other observation I make is that both of them hold great positions of responsibility. Bruce is chair of the NHMRC. Tony is the most senior executive in the New South Wales health system, responsible for medical and health and medical research. I'm not, and so that probably makes me highly irresponsible, and I shall enjoy that status during the course of my presentation. So, quick introduction to Sydney Health Partners, because I won't assume that most of you will know too much about Sydney Health Partners. Only really been on the ground for about 18 months. I'm here today because the current executive director, Gary Jennings, is overseas, and I drew the short straw, but I'm really happy to speak on behalf of Sydney Health Partners. I was quite involved last year in trying to get the partnership established and functioning as an effective partnership. Steve, I think, mentioned it's one of the first 4. There are now, I think, 9 advanced health and research Advanced Health Research and Translation Centres, AHRTCs, recognised by the NHMRC, and very simple vision for Sydney Health Partners. It's working as a partnership to transform the way that research improves patient care and public health in our health system, and that's a really important point to keep in mind, that the focus is very much on working as a partnership, particularly with the LHDs and the Children's Hospital at Westmead, to deliver better patient outcomes and public health in the healthcare system. There are the partners, the 3 local health districts that Steve mentioned, and the Children's Hospital at Westmead, together with the University of Sydney, are at the core of the partnership, and all of our brilliant associated independent research institutes, which are on the screen and listed on the little banner there. Our objectives, again, I don't want to spend any time on this. You can look it up. We have a website. I don't know if we tweet or not, to be really honest with you. I'm sure somebody does. I think we do. I think we have a Twitter account, but it's not my thing particularly. But But you can look it up. We have a pretty good web presence these days, and you can find out more about Sydney Health Partners. But I do think these 4 objectives capture really well what it is I think we're trying to do through the partnership. Again, primary focus on delivering patient and public benefit. We also want to ensure that our health system works, and in particular we're interested to understand and break down some of the barriers to collaborative and efficient working among researchers and clinicians to speed up the process of research translation. The 3 local health districts and the Children's Hospital represent about 1 in 10 of the population of Australia. So this is a real experiment trying to manage at scale. If we can make it work across Sydney Health Partners, it can work anywhere in Australia, to be completely honest. And lastly, I think for all of the partners, I think we see this as a way of distinguishing what we do and the way we work in such a way to make us internationally competitive. We want to be a place where leading researchers and clinicians aspire to work, and we believe that the partnership can help us achieve that. Again, I'm not going to get into the detail on this. The way the partnership is organised at the moment is we have a series of clinical research streams where we have individual translational research projects that are being supported in different ways in the areas that are listed there. And we also are interested at, if you like, the research infrastructure, the ecosystem that supports translational research, and some of the underlying structures that can enable us to be more effective. So we've got cross-cutting themes in informatics, biobanking, genomics, and so on, as there are listed there. Currently, within the ambit of Sydney Health Partners, we have about 40 collaborative projects, and by collaborative I mean that they're operating in at least 2 of our local health districts and among at least 3 or 4 of our partners. So they're genuine collaborations. Many of them were in place in one form or another before the partnership was established, and what we've been trying to do through the partnership is strengthen and accelerate the work that they've been doing. Now, as I've said, I'm absolutely in no position to be anything of a spokesperson on the MRFF, and I can't do that. In fact, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would claim they could be a spokesperson on behalf of the MRFF, and because of my position of irresponsibility, I feel quite able to make a few quirky observations about the MRFF. Just in the same way that I referred you to the Sydney Health Partners website and OHMR's website, I would encourage you to have a look at what is published on the MRFF, and in particular the statement, the strategy and statement of priorities, because they are worth looking at. And I pulled out from that the simple opening statement that the MRFF aspires to create a health system that's informed by quality health and medical research. I pulled that out because it fits with some of the things I've been saying, that it puts the health system first. It says that the MRFF exists to create a health system that is fully informed by health and medical research. And I do think that orientation shows up somewhat in the first round of awards. I extracted this directly, and I've given the link there if you're really interested. I've extracted this directly from the budget statement, and again, the PR statement in the budget statement really does emphasise the strategy as I described it earlier, to deliver new medical breakthroughs, enhance patient care, improve health system outcomes, ensure Australia's health security, I'm assuming that means a sustainable healthcare system, and drive innovation. And there are the list, slightly quirky list, it has to be said, of things that have been funded through this first round. What I will observe in my quirky style, because I was quite engaged on behalf of Sydney Health Partners in discussions and negotiations that led eventually to the budget statement, and the processes that we had to go through as Sydney Health Partners and as the group of AHRTCs to get to the point where 10 million of this funding was devoted to the AHRTCs. A couple of observations I would make is that I think this list could best be described as partly strategic, genuinely reflecting the intentions as stated of the MRFF, partly political, in the sense that there are some things that the government has decided it wishes to see resources allocated to. And what you won't really know is that sitting behind this, there's been an extraordinary effort, I have to say largely brokered by a hugely under pressure department, to ensure that there is some transparency in the decision making and certainly fairly good governance sitting behind it. And certainly my experience of engaging with this process was all about providing clear reassurance that any resource that was allocated through the AHRTCs would be open, competitive and transparently allocated, and that it would be subject to an organisation that had in place transparent, good quality governance. And I think that's reassuring to know, that it's not just the Minister and his or her advisors sitting there and picking from a menu of things, that there's actually, in a rather scrambled way, because there's no precedent for this in this first year, a genuine attempt, I think, to make sure that the foundations were put in place for good decision making going forward. Now, I make the point again that it was a mix of these things. It was a mix of strategy, politics, and genuine efforts at putting in place the foundations for transparency and good governance. The reason I think it's really important to focus on that is the scale, is the rate of increase of the MRFF over the next few years. As Bruce has indicated, it's quite possible that the funds to be allocated through the MRFF structure will rise to 250 million certainly in the next 3 or 4 years, and could get as high as £500 million within a relatively short period of time. And the scaling up year on year is quite phenomenal when you think about that. And I suspect certainly in these first 2 or 3 years it will continue to be this mix of strategy, policy and efforts to put in place a transparent structure that allows us to see how and why decisions have been taken. I'd have to say our goal in the AHRTCs is to create as large a funnel as possible. One of the advantages, I think, of being in at the early stages is if you get your funnel right and the amount of money grows, then you're pretty well placed. And I've got, honestly, I can say I have absolutely no idea how this scale up will be managed, but I do know from my own personal experience in government that in the end you can only land it in a number of ways in a number of places. And if you're in a good place, then you're more likely to get a fair share of the resource. But I honestly, I can't offer any more advice on the whole of the MRFF scheme than those individual, highly personal, quirky observations. And I'm sure others in the audience can offer greater insight and more information when we have our discussion session. I want to finish off very briefly, given the scaling effect here, the hundreds of millions from the NH&MRC, the tens of millions from the state government, down to the small amount of money that Sydney Health Partners is distributing through the MRFF. Just to talk to you a little bit about how that's going. Basically, in this very convoluted way, in order to ensure transparency and good governance, Sydney Health Partners has been invited to apply for MRFF funds through a particular grant stream, the so-called RART programme. And the programme has two parts. 2 million is available to each of the current, the original 4 AHRTCs, and another $2 million is available for nationwide schemes. That makes up the 10 million. We're trying to release that funding in 2 ways. Firstly, we were under enormous pressure to come up with a set of ideas that could be announced around the time or soon after the budget statement. We went through a very substantial process to be able to meet that requirement. And we were then, I think we will then be enabled to release more funds through a slightly less pressured process. Some of you will be aware of this process, some of you will have participated in this process, but the under pressure part was that we had to come up with 4 or 5 projects that we could fund that align with MRFF priorities that are listed there, could deliver improvements, observable improvements in a 12-month period, and we could be clear about how MRFF funding might add value, perhaps to an existing project. I'm going to take time over this. We went through, I think, a reasonable process along the way. There was a review panel, which I was a member of. The other panel members are listed there. And we were able, in a space of weeks, working with some really great clinicians and researchers, to come up with a set of projects that we could put forward as a part of the initial MRFF bid. We were told we'd have a decision and we'd be able to announce funding in relation to this a bit sooner than seems to be the case, but nonetheless we're expecting to be in a position to make an announcement about that sometime in the next couple of weeks. And we've recommended support for these projects between 50 and 150,000 in this 1 year. Importantly, and this is probably the thing I really just want to leave you with, there will be a second round of funding. We'll have about somewhere around about $1 million or more to disperse, again just for a 1-year period in this first instance. And these will, again, these are the criteria very similar to the ones that I mentioned earlier on. The fit with MRFF priorities, the ability to provide demonstrable improvements within a relatively limited time, and a bit of clarity about how the MRFF funds will add value. We've now a reasonably, I think, open and transparent process. And a bit like Tony, we'll make sure through various social and other media that everybody is made fully aware of that process. But it's very likely the scheme will be launched at our annual workshop, which will be held on the 18th of November. So it's likely the scheme will be launched on the 18th, process of application and decisions early in the new year. It's okay, I thought it was reggae, basically. I was about to dance. There we go. Thank you. That's all I had to say. Thanks very much. Thank you.
So I'm very sorry that Don's pacemaker played up during that session. It's a bit ominous now that the noise has stopped altogether.